Hi, my name's Tracey Onslow and I'm Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia, and we're here to have a conversation around violence against women and girls, particularly pertinent over the last year or so.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn and I'm the Chief Exec for West Mercia Rape and Sexual Abuse Support Centre.
Hi, I'm Sue Coleman and I'm the Chief Exec of West Mercia Women's Aid, and we work with victims of domestic abuse.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicola Lowery. I'm the Assistant Police Crime Commissioner for West Mercia. Very passionate about working with victims particularly, and delighted to be here today talking about a really important cause which I think is close to all our hearts, on focus against violence against women and girls and what we can do to proactively support victims and prevent obviously further crimes taking place. So no, great to be here.
We put this to Nick first, is what does VAWG mean to you personally?
I think violence against women and girls is something that's affected, I know, so many in our community, particularly in the north of the force in West Mercia, particularly in an area that I'm from, which is Telford and Wrekin, and obviously the wider Shropshire area. I know it's something that is very conscious in my mind as a woman, that it is something that is, whilst West Mercia is very safe, it's something that's very national in terms of a topic that a lot of people are focusing on, particularly with the well-known and tragic case of Sarah. So to me personally, it's something that I'm very passionate about trying to support in terms of actually supporting victims, survivors, but equally looking very heavily on the preventative side. I don't think it should always come down to women and girls to have to protect themselves, and whilst that is an important part of feeling confident and safe in our community, I'm very passionate about trying to obviously look at the preventative work, looking at perpetrator, looking at making women feel safer, more education for particularly men and boys in our community, so that everyone is aware of, I think, the main sort of areas that can cause violence against women, why that happens, what education we need to put in place. So that's certainly what it means to me personally.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Nick. And I'm really pleased there that we were talking around perpetrators and moving that dialogue on from, why doesn't she leave? And Sue and I have had this conversation before, turning around to why doesn't he stop? And I think it's probably one of the only areas where you would turn around to a victim to say, you need to do something about this to stop this, rather than looking at the perpetrator and saying, no, you need to do this. And somehow, certainly around domestic abuse, we've kind of perpetuated that myth that it's down to the victim to sort it out. So, Sue, you've obviously had many years' experience in this field. So I'm just wondering, from your side, what does the violence against women and girls and gender mean to you?
Thank you. I mean, I'd like to just share a conversation that I had yesterday with a colleague, actually, because I think it illustrates where I'm coming from. And we run a service for young people, actually outside of West Mercia, and this was an issue that a colleague wanted to share with me around her decision making, and she was recounting the experiences of a young woman that she's working with at the moment, and the concerns that she and others have about the coercive control, the extent to which that young woman is feeling pressured into engaging in sex when she doesn't really want to, but she does that in order to keep the peace. And I was, as she was talking, I was reflecting on the extent to which she was describing circumstances for a young woman as being issues of concern that people should be doing something about, that reflected what for me, and I'm in my 60s now, but what for me was actually par for the course when I was 14, 15, 16, and was exactly the same for my peers. I knew that all my friends were in the same kind of circumstances. And I think and I think it's interesting that we're talking about this and thinking about violence against women and girls more at the moment because of the high profile tragedies that we've had in the last 12 months, Sarah Everard being one of those. But actually, those kind of experiences have been the experiences of women for much, much longer than the last 12 months. Certainly my lifetime. Certainly I know my mum's lifetime. And you can continue to go back. And I think that what the last 12 months has done has started to shine a light on those experiences, and I think it's beholden on us. And for me, this is personally what I feel is so important. It's beholden on us to go, do you know what? It's not just those ones that hit the headlines. This is happening to women and girls everywhere in the world, a lot worse in some places, certainly everywhere in this country, regardless of where they live, regardless of the communities that they live in. And it has been like that for, who knows, a very, very long time. It is the norm. That's the frightening thing. That's the really frightening thing. And what the media does is it tends to lift things out and turn them into something that's an exception, because that's news and that's what sells. But actually, that's the tip of an iceberg, which is the reality for most women and girls in this country.
And I think this is everywhere. And it's almost, you read some horrific stories about cases that happen, in other countries as well. And it's almost an accepted, this kind of thing happens, but, we've just got to kind of roll with it a bit. And that's just not the case, is it? And I know, Jocelyn, in your line of work, this again has been many years' work for you around this particular area. So I just wondered for you personally, going on particularly some of the things that Sue's just said, what your views were, whether you would concur with Sue around it.
Absolutely, and I think the thing when Sue was talking, and you're saying about what does it mean to you personally, I have never understood why violence against women and girls is seen as a women-only problem. And as soon as you say this is something that affects women, it allows other people in the discourse to just say, it's not my problem. And Sarah Everard, tragic murder, tragic circumstances, and it was that unusual stranger rape situation. The grim reality is that, 86% of people who are raped will know the person that's raped them, probably partners, family members, and it's never reflected. Sue said it's not the sensational part in the media. And I am a feminist. I, cut my arm off, it says feminist all the way through. But I also feel that men can be feminists, and it's about that challenging that bystander mentality of which nothing to do with me. And if you see somebody being harassed in the street, if you see somebody who is vulnerable, step in, as long as it's safe for you to do so. It's about blaming the victim. And you started off by saying that in no other crime do you actually say to that person, well, what are you going to do about it? But with rape and sexual violence, it's constantly, well, what were you doing? Were you in the wrong place? What were you doing? And Sarah Everard was walking home, and one of the placards at the vigil was, she was just walking home. And surely, in 2022, the 21st century, should we not have an environment and a society where women and girls are free to go about their daily lives without thinking, this is going to get me into trouble? This is, what am I doing? And it's so programmed from an early age, where you start off at school and somebody pinks your bra strap or grabs your chest. Go into any pub or club and there will be sexual harassment and sexual assaults happening. But because we are conditioned as women just to accept it, and it's, it's what happened. I think you said, you just put up with it. But why should we? And why, for me, the bit that really rankles me is, why are we teaching our next generation of girls and boys that behaviour is acceptable?
And I think that's so right. When you were talking there, I was thinking of the, when you're told about, well, you can't go out dressed like that. You shouldn't get, women, you shouldn't have been that drunk. Well, you shouldn't have walked up there. There is so many reasons why it's the victim's fault that this has happened. Why are they on their own at 11:30 at night walking home? Well, that's just a stupid thing to do. They're asking for it. They're not in control of themselves because they've had too much to drink. But it's okay for men to do that, but it's not okay for women to do that because we're asking for something else to happen. So, Yeah, thank you. And I absolutely, agree with the sentiments that we've been discussing around just that. Why is it this is the only crime type where it's down to the victim to do something about it?
And I think you've seen that in how, certainly I would say that for my friends and family, and colleagues as well. People women and girls feel the need to change their behaviour to leave early, so it's not as unsafe to walk home at that time, and it shouldn't always come down to the potential victim or survivor of that scenario. It should be men looking at how their behaviour can change, how they can make women feel more comfortable. I had a gentleman walking past me the other evening, which is very close in the dark, and he was literally about a metre behind me, and it just makes you feel very uncomfortable. But I'm sure there was nothing meant by that. Thankfully nothing happened, but that's just an example, I think, of how men and boys, hopefully in our community, can be more aware of how that can impact women, and that it shouldn't always come down to us to change our behaviour.
I mean, I think the Holly and Jessica, horrendous murders is 20 years ago, and they were not on their own. They were not dressed in any way that, could be deemed as being provocative. I think they'd got football shirts on, I seem to remember at the time. It was the middle of the afternoon, and yet still, they weren't safe. And that's 20 years ago, and two young girls, they were 10 years of age.
I think there's that thing, if there are, and saying about it not just being a women's issue, but if there are this many men in the world and this many are abusers, why are this many letting them get away with it?
Yeah.
And that's the focus that I think it needs to change, because whether it's violence against women and girls or men and boys, the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men.
Yeah,
absolutely. And both Sue and Jocelyn, what have your organisations done to support victims and survivors and perpetrators of VAWG? What particular areas do you focus on to help those people in our community?
Well, Women's Aid works with anyone who's experienced domestic abuse. I mean, over 95% of our client group are women, and we're a feminist organisation. We see domestic abuse as being a gendered phenomenon. It's the expression of masculine power over women, and it reflects the disadvantage that women experience in our society. So it's not surprising that the majority of the victims of domestic abuse are women. We provide safe refuge for women that are forced to leave their homes because they're not safe to stay there. We provide a helpline, 24/7 helpline, so that any woman can contact us if she needs help or if she just needs to talk. We will have callers to our helpline who don't have to give us their names, who may talk about their abuse for the first time in their lives. That abuse may have been 20 years ago, but it will still be integral to the way in which that woman sees herself and lives her life. We offer support for children and young people, and our work with young people is growing. And I would just want to say that the extent to which young women are experiencing abuse is alarming, and there is very little comfort in the way in which young men or young people, I think, see relationships at the moment that would lead me to believe that life is going to be any better. And certainly technology is contributing to that, with the availability of the normalisation of abusive pornography and violence, and the capacity to be able to share images and to coerce young women into sharing images, and then seeing those as being something that you can share with all of your mates. I mean, circumstances are actually worse, I think, for young women today than they were for me in my time, and they were a challenge then. So our services are there to provide whatever support we can to help to enable women to make themselves safe, working really closely with the police in order to do that, and to enable them to find a way to recover and rebuild their lives, because domestic abuse is the ultimate betrayal. It's the abuse of power. It's torture. It's harassment. It's often physical violence. It's often sexual violence by someone who, at the same time, purports to love you, who may be the father of your children.
And I think harmful sexualised behaviours is going to be the next wave that's already on us, isn't it? Because, you know, I can remember, I mean, I'm 52, but I can remember when, you know, to access pornography was a really difficult thing to be able to try and do, because I can remember there was this shelf. I mean, only being 5'2", I could never reach the top shelf anyway, but there would be a top shelf with those magazines that had got some brown paper wrapped around the centre of them, and we certainly, you had no, you know, even when the young men were trying to access it, you had no chance of accessing any type of pornography. You couldn't get those off the shelf, and there wasn't anything else. Now, tap into your phone, and there it is, whatever you want, whatever kind you want. And I think people see that as an image of something for them to look at. I don't think they realise the people who are involved in that, what they're going through, what they've been made to do in order to do this. You know, and it's sort of it's a choice for some people. Well, is it? Is that really the choice they want to make?
Yeah.
And Jocelyn, I think we were going to sort of ask you about the same, about your organisation and VAWG. What have you been doing around VAWG in particular?
Well, we work with all survivors of all forms of sexual violence, so whether it's rape, sexual assault, abuse, exploitation, and we work with survivors from the age of 5+. So we have some very, very young children coming through the doors to receive support, and we also put in support for non-abusing family members as well. We have a range of services. There's the advocacy service that supports through the criminal justice process. There's a therapy service, the counselling service, which supports clients for long-term therapy, because recovering from sexual violence isn't a short 6 to 8 sessions and you're in and you're out. But at the moment, we have a helpline, we do online chat, we have a range of resources. And we work across Herefordshire, Worcestershire and a little part of Shropshire. In the last 12 months, we've developed new services. We have an LGBTQIA+ advocacy worker, a cultural responsive advocacy worker, and also Branch Plus we've developed, which is for those women and girls particularly, because as Sue said, it is very much a gendered crime. But for those girls and young women who are going to move from being exploited as children as being exploited as adults. And picking up your point about saying, well, is it a choice? Well, if your choice is you either feed your kids and keep the roof over your head and sell your body, is that really a choice?
Absolutely.
Alongside that, you were asking about perpetrator programs. And I really don't like the word perpetrator, because we work with children and young people. And it's about the harmful sexualised behaviour. What we were finding when we started our children's service is that we started to have children who had both been abused, they'd experienced abuse, but they had also harmed another child as well. And that led us on to this sort of development of a service to say, well, this is clearly happening. And, you know, the rise of pornography, the impact of moving images on children, and thinking that it's normal because it doesn't come with a warning, you know, and the way that it's impacting on society and impacting on young people is really quite startling, I think is the word. So what we are doing is we can complete assessments now for children who have displayed harmful or problematic sexualised behaviour. So they might have assaulted another child, they might be displaying behaviours appropriately in inappropriate places, and working to see how we can make an intervention. Because the thing about sexual violence is, unless we start with education, and that comes back to the theme of it's everybody's problem, how are we ever going to tell people that there needs to be a change? So if you can put in at the start, this is a healthy relationship, this is a healthy behaviour, these behaviours are unacceptable no matter who is doing them to you and what is happening, I think you can make a real change. And with that, when organisations have started to look at peer-on-peer abuse, where abuse is happening between children of the same age group, when you start looking at that, it can be, well, you've got somebody who's a victim, but there's also a safeguarding risk around the child that's perpetrated the sexual violence, and we need to make an intervention to try and change their trajectory for life so that they don't go on and repeat those behaviours and damage more people as they go.
Yeah, I think you raised a really interesting point there, Jocelyn. As you say, it's very much about working people proactively, changing behaviours, and not, I suppose, as you say, putting them in that category of a perpetrator. I think, as you say, it's about working with people, and I think the rise of sadly online pornography, as we've talked about, really is just amplified, that people are assuming the things they're seeing online, as you say, there's no warnings that abusive sexual relationships are normalised, which is so highly concerning.
And even where there are age warnings, like Grand Theft Auto, which, we haven't worked with a child yet who hasn't accessed Grand Theft Auto, and the amount of abuse that is in there, where you can pay for a prostitute, and if you kill her, you don't have to pay her. Well, if you've got a 12-year-old, you can go into a lap dancing club.
Yeah, and I think the big concern is how commercialised it's become. It's only growing very, very, I suppose, concerningly. I mean, what do you think could be done more by individuals, society, to try and address this, Jocelyn, in your mind? What do you think we need to be focusing on to try and address the problem, essentially?
I think we need to be more courageous as a society. I think we need to be able to, we're working with Herefordshire and Worcestershire on Safer Streets, which is like a bystander intervention, working with door staff, taxi staff, so that if you see somebody who is vulnerable, or if you see somebody who is in trouble, you challenge that behaviour. Similarly, if you're, a young lad and you're out with a group of lads and they're catcalling somebody, challenge the behaviour. If you wouldn't want anybody to say it to your mum or your nan, don't say it. It's not appropriate. That's the limit. And a lad, probably about 3 months ago, and I said, well, would you say that to your sister? And he said, well, nobody said that to my sister. She's my sister. But that girl's somebody else's sister. So put a bit of thought into it, put a bit of context. There is inequality, and, the whole thing about women and girls and International Women's Day, it is about challenging that bias. The thing that has always gobsmacks me is that rape within a marriage wasn't a crime until 91, 92. How is that even possible? And we still have people coming to the centre going, oh, you've made your bed, you've got to lie in it. So we need to be challenging that, supporting women and girls, educating all of our children, so that they have got the confidence, and adults as well, to be able to say that's just not appropriate. We're not going to achieve change and stop domestic abuse or sexual violence until we can actually challenge that imbalance in society as well. That women have got just as much right to be wherever they are, whenever they are, and be who they are.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be in the home as well, hasn't it? Parents have got to be, understanding what their children are doing, where their children are, who they're with, the types of things they say, the types of things they watch, read, all of this. And it's getting in there really early on, isn't it, to stop this behaviour just becoming a cyclical. So if we had one message that we wanted to pass on to our listeners about VAWG, what would it be? I think mine is that very early on, challenging these behaviours when you hear them, when you come across it in your lives, just having the confidence to just say that's not acceptable. That would be mine.
Yeah, and I think, as you were saying, Jocelyn, it's calling it out at every opportunity. I know that some people do purely say it in jest, but jest can, as you were just sort of referring to, I think it is very much challenging those perceptions, those behaviours, looking at healthy relationships. I think it has to start in schools and in the home, as Tracey was just talking through. It's absolutely vital that we start to change people's perception of relationships, and equally, as you say, being much more courageous, I think, about calling it out in our society and taking that proactive action.
Absolutely. And what would yours be, Jocelyn?
Be that violence against women and girls is everybody's problem. It's not just women and girls. And that, we need everybody's help to make changes.
Yeah, and I think that has to come from, and I've seen it quite a bit on social media, men standing up to say this is a male problem, owning that issue. And I think that's been really powerful to hear that from men, actually taking that ownership of it, that it isn't just a female problem, that they need to work with like-minded individuals, their community, to actually call out certain behaviours that's coming from people in their community. I think that's a really powerful message when men actually stand up and actually take that ownership of the problem as well.
I think it comes down to respect as well, doesn't it? You know, you respect other people, treat them as you would want to be treated, and make a positive change.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's been brilliant. I mean, this is one of a series of podcasts that we're going to be doing, isn't it, on looking at violence against women and girls, seeing what VAWG means to them as part of a wider sort of campaign we're focusing on. We want to talk, hear us. So it's been really interesting to hear both of your views and to hear everyone.
Take care.
See you. And you, cheers. Bye.